Good morning. My name is Cameron Byrne, General Manager of Partnerships here at the AFA. I hope everyone is safe and well in these challenging times. I'm excited today to introduce you to our webinar titled How to Comply with New ASIC Complaint Requirements under RG 271, brought to you in partnership with Guided Resolution and Assured Support. Today you'll hear from Ross Paul, Founder and CEO, Guided Resolution, and Sean Graham, Managing Director, Assured Support. A little bit about Ross. Ross is the founder and CEO of Guided Resolution. Guided Resolution develops software for resolving complaints and disputes that is scalable to any volume and produces speedier outcomes. Ross founded the business after a wide-ranging career in the AFS industry, banking, sell-side and buy-side, and he brings a deep understanding of client needs in this sector. Sean Graham is the Managing Director of Assured Support. Sean is the architect for the Open AFSL compliance platform and since 1996 has specialised in financial services law, compliance and risk management. He has extensive experience in distribution, stockbroking, product manufacturing and advice. Sean helps advisors and licensees to cope with regulatory complexity and frequent change by providing clear, practical and commercial advice. In today's webinar, financial advisors will soon be scrutinised by ASIC on how they identify, record and deal with complaints. The new regulatory guidance, RG 271, becomes enforceable on the 5th of October 2021. It will involve a far more proactive management approach that serves to build data. Compliance is a must, thanks to quite a few standards that will come into force of the law. Whether you have one complaint in a year or 1,000, ASIC will require all AFSL holders to be able to quickly resource up. This webinar session will show participants how to manage the new requirements in a cost-effective way. It will cover the key changes and focus on the practicalities of operationalising compliance. Sorry, a bit of a tongue twister there. We will also demonstrate a simple text solution as an add-on capability to reinforce existing procedures and help meet the tightened standards. This session will be run in an interactive way with question and answers throughout. Before we begin, I would like to cover off some housekeeping. Today's webinar will have one CPD hour available and we'll send out details within this week. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation, but if I can please ask you to use the Zoom Q&A feature and not the chat feature, as you can see in the diagram on the slide. Ross and Sean, we thank you for putting this important information together to help all our members. Let's kick off.
Thanks, Cam. Welcome, everyone. We have three objectives for the next hour. The first is to reach 100% awareness of what ASIC requires on October 5th. Second, understand the parameters, what it means, how ASIC is likely to monitor and judge. And finally, we'll touch on some options available to comply. RG 271's been building up over a period of time. ASIC grew tired of complacency, aka the big four banks, and now it's moved down into this room today. They want a level of structure in dealing with complaints. They're saying that they don't care if AFSL holders have only one dispute a year. They're throwing it back on the industry, so you must have the infrastructure and back end sorted in case they come knocking. What they'll look for is process and data. They're probably going to make an example of someone and monitor on an ongoing basis. I know this stuff must be frustrating, as your time is better spent growing a business and building a kid's inheritance. But there is a nice quote from Deloitte, which basically says, satisfying your customers and satisfying regulators are not two mutually exclusive propositions. And I think that's true in relation to RG 271. Now, ASIC set a long lead time on implementation, which tells us that the bar has been lifted. But there's no clear view on how the law will apply until there are actions that refer to a breach. So Sean, advisors have plenty on their plates right now, and they've been hit with so many new requirements all at once. Why not wait and see?
Yeah, Look, there are a couple of ways you can react to this whole range of regulation that's coming down on us like a tsunami. The reality is that we've had time to wait and see. I mean, the draft policy was issued last year. We've had time to try to plan it. One of the problems with Deloitte's assessment, in theory, that works fine. The problem is that often the regulators' expectations and consumer and participant expectations aren't aligned. And one of those ways, which we'll talk about later on, is in terms of the way that ASIC's approach the data that needs to be collected in response to complaints. But the reason why you can't just take a step back and just say, look, I'll just wait and see what happens, is because of the way in which all these new regulatory changes come together. Now, every advisor who's listening to this knows, okay, day one, 1st of October, we've got a new breach regime, we've got a new reference checking system. On the 5th, the complaints comes in, then we've got design and distribution obligations that come in as well. What's interesting about that is the way in which they all fit together. Because when you look at these things in isolation and you might think, I'm an advisor, I don't get many complaints, or that's a licensee's problem, you know, I don't need to worry about it. The way that these four streams of regulation work together, it creates mandatory reporting to the regulator in terms of design and distribution, in terms of breaches, in terms of complaints, in terms of reference checking. And at every mandatory report, the advisor or the authorised rep is identified as well. So like it or not, we're moving into a regime where the regulator is going to be getting a lot more data about us. Now, whether or not the licensee feeds that data, and some of that is mandated, they have to feed it through. So breach notices, for example, they need to feed it through, or the breach obligations also apply to your peers as well. So there are a whole range of ways in which you can get on the radar, the regulator's radar, in a way that probably doesn't work for you. So as an advisor, you need to be able to manage your personal regulatory risk. And so one of the ways you can do that here is you can't control every aspect of the complaints process. That's going to rest with your licensee. But what it does mean, if you're an advisor, you're an authorised rep of a licensee, you've got to understand how this works from day one because of the consequences of getting it wrong, of either missing the time frame, failing to identify things, because you're far more exposed and more vulnerable come the 1st of October because of the way in which all these things fit together. And if you're a small licensee, you can't afford to take a step back, because one of the things the breach regime creates is deemed significant issues, which are breaches or contraventions that the law says, you know, the presumption is they're significant and need to get reported to the regulator. Now, one of those breaches that are deemed significant are failures of core license obligations. And when you think about your core license obligations, what's one of those is to have an effective complaints IDR system. So if you don't have an effective IDR system from the 1st of October, that's an issue that is deemed significant or can be a deemed significant breach. And so you don't want to be in the spotlight from day one reporting deficiencies. And what they've done, which is really clever, is that the first enforceable rule under 271 says that in order for your IDR arrangements to be adequate, you've got to have a dispute resolution system that meets ASIC standards and requirements. So even if you don't get a lot of complaints, even if you've never received a complaint, you've been in the industry 20 years, you've never had to worry about those types of things. If you're a small licensee or any type of licensee, you've got to have your arrangements in place on 1 October, because you don't want to be in a position where you're in breach of your license and start reporting breaches from day one. Now, ASIC have given you, 18 months to wrap your head around the core elements of 271, but understand it's something that they've given time for. They've expected you to meet that. And the way in which all these little pieces work together mean there's a lot more visibility and a lot more exposure for advisors and for licensees. So you can't wait.
Excellent. Now, in terms of who, 271 casts a wide net. Fintech, credit providers, mortgage brokers, and folks, spare a thought for the Debt Collectors and Debt Buyers Association, whose members weren't carved out from these new requirements. Now, in that segment of the industry, every customer expresses their dissatisfaction using 4-letter words creatively. Now, in terms of the what, so basically it comes with the force of law. It sets out how financial firms must manage their internal dispute resolution processes as a core license obligation. It requires a more proactive and enabling approach to dealing with complaints, and failure to comply with the enforceable standards could result in civil penalties. In that regard, Sean, what sorts of fines and penalties are we talking about for breaches, and are there any recent examples, bearing in mind it's a core license obligation?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a tendency for consultants and compliance people to self-fear and talk about the worst that can happen. We don't want to be alarmist here. We just want to give you a realistic appreciation. But let's take a step back and let's look at the theoretical element. Because it's a breach of your core license obligations, or can be a breach of your core license obligations, those attract some significant penalties. So what we're talking about for a breach of your 912A, in this case, your IDR process, what you're looking at there is, if you're a natural person, theoretical, and I emphasize this, it's not to say this is going to be the standard response, but it's 5,000 penalty units, and a penalty unit is about $220, so $222. So you're looking at a maximum penalty for a natural person of being $1.11 million. Now, you'd be hard pressed to justify that. At a corporate level, it's 5 times as much. So that can be 50,000 penalty units, which is in real terms is about $11.1 million. But also the way the law was changed recently is that when ASIC's seeking those types of penalties, they can get that, or they can get 3 times the benefit gained or the detriment suffered, or 10% of annual turnover. So theoretically, it's massive. The reality is, when you look at ASIC's regulatory policies and when they tend to apply these types of penalties, they're not going after people who are making legitimate attempts to comply with the law. What they're looking for is recklessness, systemic failures, willful ignorance. And there are a couple of cases where we've seen before where ASIC have taken action in response to breaches of license, not necessarily about complaints, but your general license obligations. And we had the Dover case, but there was one recently with Union Standard, which was, and in that case, they also banned the responsible manager and the director from the industry, because in addition to the fines, which the civil penalty provisions, they've got administrative responses as well, right? So license conditions, banning orders. And so in that Union Standard case, they banned the RM and the director for 10 years because they found that he was effectively, the banning was justified on the basis that his lack of understanding or regard for compliance was so significant that there's time to give him a break from the industry. So that's always an option. So don't just focus on the civil penalty provisions. They're a theoretical maximum. You're unlikely to get that if you're making reasonable efforts, putting systems in place, and you're making a bona fide effort to comply with RG 271 and RG 78 as well. So if you're doing that, that's okay. So don't worry too much about that. What I find is really interesting about this is this whole idea of a customer-centric approach, because I'm not entirely sure what that means. What does that mean to you, Ross?
Look, it's about changing the mindset from viewing complaints as singularly negative, whinging, if you like. Instead, it's feedback. It's making it easy for customers. It's an opportunity to gather data, identify trends, and potentially drive positive change. It's also about the earlier the intake, the better, and the quality of the intake capabilities, the better. Not only getting before things become entrenched, but detect and mitigate the legal and reputation risks. It's about moving from if and when response patterns to a more proactive management approach that will help fuel the customer experience. And finally, in terms of value, it's recognising the goldmine that complaints data can represent, and that means appreciating its value and assigning a business value and working to develop a robust body of it. Sean, this is one of your quotes. So basically, data is what's driving the regulatory supervision. That's a key message from this.
And we can see that when I mentioned before, so we've got the design and distribution obligations. So that puts an obligation on licensees and issuers if they find, for example, advisors are recommending products inconsistent with the target market determination. They've got to report that, and they've got to identify the authorised rep. When you look at the breach data that has to be reported to the regulator as well, it includes the authorised rep. When you look at complaints data, and the complaints data has got to go to ASIC on a quarterly basis. So one of the things that ASIC are moving into and is, you know, an incredibly sophisticated data management business. I've often said that for advisors, the biggest asset you have is your data. You know, your knowledge of your clients, their circumstances. That's the real value of your business, quite apart from the relationship piece. ASIC have recognised it. They've recognised the value of industry data, and they've reconfigured their systems to get it. And all these regulatory changes create a level of transparency and a level of exposure, but also allow ASIC to connect the dots. And so this is why it's so important, whether you're a licensee or an advisor, to understand what 271 requires of you personally, because of the way in which the data flows up and is shared and will drive surveillance. Now, surveillance in and of itself can result in no action, right? So what you can imagine as a result of all this data being fed through to the regulator, and the regulator crunching the numbers and looking at it, theoretically, it gives them more capacity to have more targeted driven. So the capacity to hide behind large licensees has disappeared. We've also seen across the industry that the numbers of advisors have decreased. So ASIC are now in this position where they're going to have more data, a smaller sample, and a greater capacity to actually look into the activities of those advisors. So it's important to stay across that, but understand this is where the industry is going. There's an expectation that licensees as well as advisors are managing their data better. And we've seen that through the RO case as well. But generally, as we've been talking about data for a number of years, they've been trying to get us all to focus on the need to really move our businesses forward. And as Ross said, to stay on top of things and to manage the information in a more effective manner than we have done traditionally.
Data, speaking of data, that's a nice segue in a very quick straw poll. So if you can, Sean and I'd love to know just where you sit at the moment in terms of complaint volumes. So if you could please in the polling, here we go. As we expected, low levels because of your professionalism. There you go.
Well,
okay, so there's not a lot of complaints, Sean.
Well, there could be a couple of reasons for that as well. Now, when you mentioned before that we should embrace complaints, and I know theoretically that's a great thing. I can't remember the last time someone complained to me that I took it as valuable feedback initially. And this is what part of the process is looking for when you're looking at your RDR processes, is being able to put that level of objectivity behind the process as well. Now, one of the questions about low levels of complaints, as a cynical person, I might say, well, do you actually know what a complaint is? Because I talk to a lot of advisors and they say, for example, no, I don't get any complaints. I've been in the industry 20 years, never got a complaint. Well, what about when this happened? Oh, yeah, they rang up and whinged, but that was it. Well, that's a complaint, right? When clients are dissatisfied, when they're expressing, a complaint doesn't have to be in writing. And this is one of the bugbears of the industry. For a long period of time, a lot of people have turned around and said, well, they haven't put in writing. So it's just they're unhappy or they're unclear or whatever it is. And this is where it's important to focus on the fact that really understand what the definition is now, because it's changing. It doesn't have to be in writing. It doesn't have to be explicit. And to Ross's comment earlier about proactivity, there is an expectation in RG 271 that as a professional, you will help your clients identify and articulate their complaints, right? So that's something to bear in mind. And this is why training is so important for you and your staff, to make sure you can understand that if someone rings up and complains that, you know, they're unhappy with returns, well, it might not be just an issue of, well, you know, that's markets are unpredictable. what it could be is that the recommendation that underpinned it was not appropriate, and that's what we're talking about. So there's an expectation there. The new definition of what a complaint is under the new standard is a bit broader than you might expect, and so it's important to understand it. Because what a complaint is here is it's any expression of dissatisfaction made to or about an organisation related to your products, services, staff, or the handling of a complaint, as Ross put there, where a response or resolution is explicitly or implicitly expected or legally required.
And
Right,
it
so-
includes social media as well, Sean. So
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So when you say it's implicit, so if someone rings up and says to you, Ross, I implemented your advice. You said I'd have $40,000 a year in retirement. I've only got I'm only getting $25,000 a year. It's not enough. It's not enough for you to go, well, okay, well, why don't you come in and we'll see what we can. No, that's a complaint, right? That is a complaint. So whether there's an explicit statement where they've said to you, well, you got it wrong in the first place, or you should have told me I couldn't get that amount. Now, whether there's an explicit resolution required or an implicit one in that case, and this is why you've got to train not only your advisors, if you're a licensee, train your advisors to recognise complaints, but the people in their offices as well. Because when you look at the short time frame that flows from these definitions, you need to make sure that people can identify a client that's whinging or is dissatisfied or something, that hasn't really asked for anything, hasn't put anything in writing, still a complaint, still needs to be registered, reported, and managed. And you're right about that social media piece. Now, a lot of licensees might have social media and marketing policies, and they'll talk about what we can do. And we all know the types of stuff that goes on Facebook and LinkedIn and all over the place, the financial advisors are doing to differentiate themselves and put themselves out there. The problem is the definition includes social media. So if someone tags your post, for example, and puts on a response that satisfies this definition, it's a complaint. If you can identify who that person is, it's a complaint, and it needs to go through the process. So what that does mean is that when you look at your social media position, you just need to be able to take a step back and go, well, how do we control that? Do we allow people to comment on our posts? That might be the simplest way to manage that risk. Or do we have people who will monitor our online activity and identify complaints and clients and then respond? Because Harvey Norman showed what can happen when you don't properly respond to complaints online. Okay, it generated a whole tsunami of negative feedback and boycotting. You don't want that in your business. You don't want that in your licensee. You need to manage that effectively. So if you are active on social media, and a lot of advisors are, understand that's a source for complaints to be fed in. So you need to be able to monitor that as well.
Sean, I've just got some comment on what is a complaint versus feedback. I think you've just probably answered that.
Yeah, it's hard. Like, I have conversations with people and I think they're complaining. They say they're giving me feedback. It's often a subjective determination, but the policy doesn't care. So it's any expression, any time that I'm expressing dissatisfaction about anything you're doing as an advisor, anything your staff are doing, the products, the portfolio, any of those bits and pieces, that is a complaint. And so I've got to then acknowledge that as a complaint and sort it out. Now, I might be able to sort it out really quickly, which is fine, and I can close it down really quickly, but understand that that is a complaint and it's subject to these requirements here.
Yeah, sure. I just got some question about the social media. It's opinions, not law, not even facts. So I think probably that's going to be an area where we need to address as well. So in that regard, it's not social media that's third party. It's got to be social media channels that you actually own or control.
That's right, or control.
Can identify, correct.
Yeah, so, but for example, the example I used was your website, right? So you put stuff on your website, people can comment, great. If you can identify them. So if you allow people to comment on your website, but anonymously, and you can't identify them, then it's not a complaint. But if they log on and they're identified and whatever else, and you can identify them, then they're subject there. So you don't necessarily need to worry about what other people are posting about you, but what people are posting in response to your posts.
Yeah.
So if I post something and someone comes back and goes, Sean, you're an idiot for these reasons, blah, blah, I don't like what you've done, then that's a complaint, right? I can control what I've put out there, but I can't control, and I'm not responsible for third party unrelated issues. I've got to be able to control it, but I can control my Twitter feed. I can control my Facebook page. I can control my website.
Sean, I'm getting some live questions here, which are interesting. So this is a good example. So a risk advisor gets a call from a client complaining his premiums have increased by the insurer. Is that a complaint against the advisor when it's out of its control?
Well, so this is one of the things when you look at the standard of the definition about the products, you'd say, well, it is, but it's actually not a complaint. You'd have to investigate to see whether or not they're complaining about the increase or whether or not the appropriateness of the recommendation initially. So that's probably where you go to. If it's just about cost, then that's a complaint that's probably better directed about to the licensee. But you'd still take it in and you'd go, because the regulatory guide gives you capacity to close things where are outside your control.
Yeah.
Like I can't control what the insurer does, but I can control my assessment about what the required level of cover was. And if I grossed it up initially and doubled it or used 10 times their salary because it was easier, instead of doing an appropriate calculation, then that's a legitimate complaint about how I've assessed that and the flow and effects. So you've got to look at that and decide whether or not, is it implicitly an issue about the product and just the product features, or are they actually saying, they've got the wrong level of cover? And that's what I should be focusing on. Now, either way, I can deal with those really quickly because I can reconfirm, yep, you need $1.4 million. That's exactly right. They've gone up 40%. So we can look at what the alternatives are, but that's the level of cover you need. So the complaint is not about the advisor or what the advisor's done, but about the product, and you can segment it. But that's why the investigation is important, and that's why you report it and manage it quickly.
Okay, let's okay, so just to sort of summarize where we are at the moment. So basically, whether you got one complaint a year or 1,000, 271's about enabling complaints, being proactive, resourcing up, and gathering data.
Yeah, and it's funny because you think like if you're in a business that gets 1,000 complaints, there's obviously big issues. But if you're in a business that's getting 1,000 complaints, they've probably got good systems, a lot of resources, and well-trained people to manage that level of volume. Where the risk is that those smaller groups, that haven't necessarily gotten complaints because they've relied on, is it in writing? And aren't currently looking at this issue because they see it as either a licensee issue or, every licensee, every advisor can turn to the back page of their FSG or, and to highlight, here's our disputes resolution process. You contact the advisor in the first instance. If you don't get satisfaction, you write to the licensee, and within 45 days, I'll come back to you. If you're not satisfied, you get an AFCA. And for a lot of groups, that's probably as sophisticated as the dispute resolution policy gets. But one of the things you correctly identified here, Ross, is that there's a higher expectation of data and analysis and activity, which comes to that training and resourcing piece that you mentioned before.
Just checking the questions, hang on. Okay, Google reviews complaints. We have no way of controlling. No, well, I think we've probably answered that question.
You can't, unless
you control it, correct.
Unless you control Google. So if you're in charge of Google, yes, probably is, but no, it's a general rule.
Okay, the other point to note about 271 is the straight line to the CEO on board. So basically oversight of the IDR process is it's the chief executive or equivalent. And we'll talk a little bit more about reporting, which comes to the real interesting part is there's a lot of verbs beginning with the letter R in RG 271. And let's talk about the enforceable R's. So basically, if you look at resourcing, it's got to be fair, effective, efficient, And you've got to be able to deal with intermittent spikes is the terminology that ASIC uses in their regulation. Recording, you've got to have an effective system to record and track. And what we're going to do is go through this, I think, Sean. I think we want to go through what this means in terms of operationalising, how we operationalise these important enforceable parts. So reporting, you've got to have data reports to senior management and board with metrics. Responding, so written communication, you've got to be able to respond to the outcome, what actions are taking place and why. So Sean, I think the burning question is going to be, these are the real big ones, and ASIC expects more than a simple Excel spreadsheet. So how would an advisor operationalise these enforceable parts of the regulation?
That's a big question, isn't it? Like, and to be completely transparent, is that ASIC would be happy if you use an Excel spreadsheet, as long as you're recording all the information. What came out last week was a data glossary from ASIC and a data dictionary, right? 50 or 60 pages of the categorization and the data records they expect you to keep. So if you can keep that in Excel, that's fine. I think it'll probably be beyond the capabilities of most people. So again, we get back to the nature, scale, and complexity of your business. So if you're a significant business, you know, you've got multiple authorized reps, let's say 10 or more authorized reps, ASIC will expect you to have well-structured system, compliance platforms that can do all this. And one of the things that you'll notice if you read RG78 and if you read RG271, ASIC are really pushing the systems perspective. They talk repeatedly about licensees having systems in place to do this and systems to record and manage data. There's an expectation now. So if you're a small licensee, you're caught in that boat as well, right? There is an expectation you will have systems in place to manage these. So given the nature, scale, and complexity of your business, and even if you're an authorized rep of a licensee, what ASIC are expecting that you will know what complaints are, you'll have people in your business that are trained to actually identify them, record them, and escalate them. And that's what you need to be able to focus. If you're a small licensee or a bigger licensee, the expectation is, because it's a core license function, that you will have a system in place that matches exactly what's in 271. Right, so it satisfies those requirements and meets all the enforceable rules. Now that is difficult, and you know, to Ross's point, is that it's unlikely you can do that in Excel unless you've got amazing in-house capability or whatever else, because there is a lot of detail hidden in the data dictionary and hidden in the data glossary and underpinning the types of reporting that needs to go to ASIC on a quarterly basis. So resourcing is important. It's about having systems, but it's also about human capability as well. So do you have people in your business that have the empathy, the insight, and the capability to actually identify what complaints are and sort them out quickly? Because the real trick with managing everything under 271 is to be efficient, right? Efficient, effective, fair, all those bits and pieces. Because if you can resolve complaints to the client satisfaction within 5 days, then it really cuts down your obligation to do much additional type of reporting back to the clients. So in terms of recording, they're expecting to see, and some of the things that ASIC are expecting to see might surprise you. So age of the complainant. That's one of the fields you have to start to record. Who would have thought? Other demographic elements. And when you look at, and then the types of products and the types of, and one of the most frustrating things about RG271, and one of the things that makes me think that it's not really written for advice businesses, is there are only 3 categories of advice complaints. You know, advice quality, any other issues, and advisor misconduct. That's it. Whereas you look at the broad range of categories, there are about 90 categories, largely about product, credit products, insurance products, whatever else. So it's really not driven or customized to advice businesses or advice licensees, or for businesses like the people that are here. It's really driven from a product perspective. But still, you need to be able to record it, and record it in the way that ASIC expect it. And you need to be able to track those progress. So whatever systems you have, if you're using Excel, you need to have some way of actually tracking, okay, we've only got 30 days to respond now. Have we hit all the regulatory requirements? Have we got the letters out? Have we investigated? Have we communicated? And that's where the recording is really, really important. You might have been, recording that in Excel or an Access database or somewhere else. You need something better. And when you look at these reference checking, breach reporting, design and distribution, and complaints, you need a system that's going to get them all talking to each other, because you're going to get inputs from all over the place, which are relevant from that perspective. So in terms of data reports, Ross was absolutely right. What they're talking about now is making sure that the complaints data, even though it's reported to ASIC on a quarterly basis, they also want to make sure that it goes straight to the top. So there's no possibility that the head of, mega bank financial planning can say, I didn't know about that. There's an expectation that those complaints will be escalated internally so the board and management know what's going on, because they're good lead indicators or lag indicators of problems. Okay, so in terms of written communication, in terms of the responsiveness, and this is a critical part, you need people in your business, and not just having 7 people in the complaints team. You need people in your complaints team who are good at their job, who can have the forensic and analytical skills to actually identify what the complaint is, but have the human ability to actually communicate it and to talk to and to provide empathy and reassurance and understanding and all those things. Because in a lot of times, a lot of complaints come down to the fact that the person wants to be heard. And they're frustrated or they're unhappy with something, they want to communicate that. So they want to be heard, they want to be understood. So you want people who have that skills. Now, RG271 also talks about having people who can understand, various cultural and other sensitive approaches. So you need to have people with the right skills as well. So Ross is absolutely right. Resourcing, recording, reporting, and responding are fundamental to whatever you're going to use to help you move ahead.
Yep.
And in terms of the response time, it's 30 days. It's down from 45 to 30 days for a standard complaint.
Yeah, superannuation trustees and some other businesses still have 45 days, but 30 days for us. Yeah, for licensees.
Yeah, Ross and Sean, there's another question that's come up, which is really, really relevant to this industry, because we all feel that there's a really tight focus on financial services and advice. Is there any other industry that ASIC's requirements for complaints handling are similar to? Can you sort of shed some light on that, or is it the industry that's the flavour of the month on a continual basis?
It's hard to really answer that question, Cameron, because there's not a lot of comparability. You'd probably expect that the Law Society and doctors get a lot of complaints, but not the volume that they get. Financial services is so dominant as an industry across Australia, so you'd expect that. The issue that I see here is that based on AFCA's data, only 1.4% of the complaints they got last year were about financial advice. Yeah. The vast majority of them are about insurers and manufacturers and whatever else. So from my perspective, it seems a bit of a disconnect that these types of requirements are being pushed out to licensees and advisors when they're not necessarily represented in the data. And I think part of this is the old legacy issue. We went through a Royal Commission where a lot was flagged, but a lot of those issues weren't caused by the people on the call, right? They were institutional, structural issues, which are no longer here. So you're right. I can understand the frustration in that question. We are, in some respects, over-regulated. There is a level of regulation that's driven by past failures, which have already been addressed, and a terror of failures occurring in the future. But yeah. I think we've got a couple of years where we've got a series of regulation which is going to make it tighter and tougher. But I think whether it's 3 to 5 years down the track, we're going to have a really strong advice profession. It's just getting through this. And once we get to that point, then the regulators and the legislators will be able to roll back some of this type of regulation. But all the stuff here that's all these principles that Ross has pointed out, the four R's, are just good business anyway.
Yeah. Well, then I think it's a good comment to pick up on that. a lot of these changes are not driven by those on the call. They're fixing the historical issues. And I think it further adds to the resilience of those on the call and the members of the AFA within the industry, of just how strong and resilient we all are to keep pushing and moving forward. And I think the information that's forthcoming today is just putting a process and a system in place, because every industry gets complaints. But I think, if there's a robust system in place, it's going to assist everyone on this call and everyone within the industry to work through for the next few years until we really clean the process up and rationalise it and move forward in a really positive place to be.
So, Sean, I have a question. So if I'm an advisor and I had a customer, a client that just walked out shaking their head, obviously an expression of dissatisfaction, wordlessly, that triggers does that trigger a self-reporting obligation?
Well, this is where what you might do first and foremost is contact the client and find out whether or not they are dissatisfied, because it could be something completely unrelated to what you've done.
Right.
Every person's fighting a battle you can't see, right? So you don't necessarily know that they're reacting to you or anything you've said. It could be the bloke who yelled at them in the traffic or whatever else this morning. But yeah, you'd follow that up. And if they say, they ring me up and I say, yeah, I don't like what you've done, it's blah, 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 then you record it. The expectation is, even before you report it, you'll at least, if you've got those cues that the client might be complaining, or they should have a legitimate reason to complain, that's when you should contact them and have that conversation with them. And good advisors do that anyway. I mean, good advisors, the fundamental, the bedrock of successful advisors is their ability to relate and understand and communicate with their clients, right? Most of them can do that and will do that. All the law is saying now is, okay, when you're doing that, record it. Because if you record it, you might see underlying themes in your practice or your business, which you hadn't picked up before. So this is where it goes back to your observation before, that you can actually use this to improve your business and improve everything if you're identifying the right things. And all RG271 is trying to give you some framework around it to say, do it this way. They might have over-egged it, but the principle and the intent behind it's not such a bad one.
Yeah, guys, just in the essence of time, just really quickly, I know we've only got sort of 18 minutes to go. Questions come through. Please repeat the 3 matters that apply to ARs about what complaints are.
The definition.
Yeah, and then we just might move on just in the essence of time, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So the more expansive definition, and this is in RG 271, 27 to 29 for those of you playing at home. What it says there is an expression of dissatisfaction made to or about an organisation related to its products, services, staff, or the handling of a complaint, where a response or resolution is explicitly or implicitly expected or legally required. And the definition also covers off remediation. If someone rings up to complain about your remediation approach, whatever, that's also a complaint. So yeah, you can see it's more expansive. It doesn't have to be in writing. It doesn't have to be explicit. It's implicit. As long if you pick up the fact that they're dissatisfied, or I communicate an expression of dissatisfaction, which might be headbutting you or throwing stuff at you or screaming and carrying on, any of those things trigger the investigation of a complaint anyway.
Just while you're moving on to the next slide, there's a point, and it's a very good point that I'd like to just point out. The overregulation will paralyse the industry and be the cause of exasperating mental illness. Mental illness is on the increase, not only in this industry, but across all social strata, particularly in the 20 to 30 something. So again, I think the key message from this is the systems and what Ross and Sean are talking about today should help manage a lot of the worry around handling complaints, and it'll put in a much more robust process. So it should take some of that stress that contributes to possible mental illness away from advisors. So I think it's a very good point to raise by that participant. Thank you very much.
And there's a bit of level of frustration as well. I think, Sean, I can see that someone's highlighted the fact that complaints to the industry ombudsman were about 2.31% of advice out of 26. So
1.4%. Yeah, 1.4% based on what they put in. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's not. The issue is, and it goes to Cameron's point as well, is that this is coming out. So we've got choices, ways in which we can respond. We can dig our feet in the sand and say, no, we're not shifting, we're not doing that, whatever else. Or we can bend like a reed in the wind and just go, okay, that's what it is. How do we operationalize it in a way that doesn't significantly increase my cost, doesn't increase my stress, doesn't increase my resourcing or whatever? How do I deal with this smarter? And everyone who's listening has options about how they can respond to the requirements of the law and the compliance obligations and the professional obligations. They make those choices every day. All we're saying here is, look, here's what's expected. If you need to understand, you want to figure out ways around it, Ross and I are here to help you to answer those questions and to move it across. But we do appreciate it is frustrating. We do appreciate it is an increasingly highly regulated environment. We're not writing the regulation. We're just trying to put this together for you and say, understand what this means. You're moving into a new regime where there's a lot more data about what you do, how you do things. You've got to manage, if you're an advisor, there's an obligation on you to manage your personal risk, right? And your reputation risk and your sustainability, which is why you need to understand how these things work, even if you don't like them.
Sean, I've received a question. It's really directed at me. Are you aware of any firm who's developed or will develop a program or software to assist in managing the IDR obligation to process? I'll post you some information about guided resolution at the end. So let's move.
Just a time check, Ross and Sean. We've just got 14 minutes to go. So
got it.
Wow, that's
been some very, very good discussion.
Okay, well, that's probably a great segue into our second and final poll. Interested to know if you can use the polling to give your feedback, how you're feeling about 271 at this point. Okay, numbers coming in. Looking like it's about 60-40. So 40% yes, and 60% no or unsure.
That's pretty well split, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, so, that doesn't surprise me though, Ross. I mean, the thing about 271 is that even though it came out a year ago, people have had other things on their mind, right? There's been a lot going on. We've had changes to FDSs, consent orders, all that's been changing. We've had, platform providers and trustees intruding into the process to a very great degree. We've had a whole range of change coming through. We've had weaponized look-back processes implemented by the larger licensees. And we've had people being forced to get their own license and leave the institutions that they... So it's no surprise that everyone's been distracted by this, right? The difficulty is that some of the key requirements only came out last week. So the data dictionary and the data glossary. So what I'd suggest is if you're not sure, ask your licensee. You'll see where they update the FSG. If they haven't already updated the FSG to say it's 30 days, chances are they haven't moved ahead. If they're not talking more generally and rolling out training to you as their rep to say, here's what a complaint is. When this happens, here's what we're expecting you to do. Log it in through the web form, the web app on our website. Let us know about it straight away. If they're not having those conversations with you, chances are they're not across it already. And for your benefit, for your personal benefit, you need to start prompting them a little bit because they need to be across that because that flows down to you.
Yeah. Just receiving some other feedback. Interesting. Shouldn't our reps push ASIC to require advisors to only be required to deal with complaints that have been lodged officially in writing via complaints repository in the AFSL so that we're not fighting shadows?
No, because that was one of the things that came out of the Royal Commission is there were a lot of people who, even when they put things in writing, were just ignored. And so they don't want to put barriers in place for people who can't articulate things, don't feel confident, have English as a second language, and who we don't want to put barriers in place for people exercising their consumer rights, which is the issue. So yeah, I could understand the appeal of that. We also don't want to get into a point where AFCA is helping people formulate their complaints, which again, we've seen in the past. So it's better that they talk to you in the first instance. It's better that you can try to resolve it as quickly as possible. But I do appreciate that there's a view that you might be fighting with shadows all the time. Certainly better if you're doing that and controlling it than allowing the regulator or a group like GAFCA to make that determination for you.
Okay, so let's move to just some options to sort of deal with this now. So there's probably 4. You can either knuckle down and be distracted from business growth. You can probably pay someone on the team to sort of deal with it, wait and see, hope they don't serve any notices or chase you, or use something already created so you don't have to take your eye off the ball. So Sean, what's your thinking on you know, the clock's ticking, the October 5th looms large?
Yeah. Well, I think the wait and see is a terribly optimistic approach and self-defeating. You know, I know Edgar Allan Poe says we all pursue our own self-destruction. That's probably the number 3 option. The reality is, you know, like all of you guys know, you've got life insurers feeding ASIC data about lapses and whatever else. They're going to be getting all this information. And if you're out of kilter or you're highlighted as being, you know, different to the median or whatever, chances are someone's going to have a look at you eventually. Now, even if ASIC do a surveillance and nothing happens as a result, don't think that that's not costly. I mean, we know of one client who went through that exact process with ASIC. Took 2 years, cost $200,000, and all that time and energy for ASIC just to say, okay, we're satisfied. You don't want to be in that situation, so you want to be proactive in managing your own risk. So you want to, the only thing you need to do is either knuckle down, implement it in your business, take control of it yourself, or engage somebody either internally or externally to help you do it. But you're going to need some type of system or service, whatever it is. There's going to be ways, because it is too data driven and too complex in terms of the information that needs to go back to the regulator to be able to really manage internally without help.
Yeah. Just looking at the questions, there's still a lot of frustration out there, Sean. And I think what's your view on that?
Oh, there's way been a lot of frustration in financial advice. I mean, we're the most highly regulated, highly scrutinised industry in Australia. I think, you know, us and childcare workers are probably the only 2 that will get the same level of scrutiny. But we've also got the additional complexity of frequent change. You know, every couple of months, the moment we start to get comfortable that our business is running well, our advice process is working effectively, something changes. You know, because there's something that happened in the past and regulation finally catches up when we need to do it. Plus, on top of that, we've got the FASEA code, which sets aspirational standards which are above the law. So I understand the frustration. It's been incredibly complex and difficult and trying number of years from the start of the Royal Commission to today. All I can say is, you know, there is light at the end of the tunnel, but we're only just starting into the tunnel, unfortunately. I can't see it changing shortly. So I understand your frustration. I get it. I hear it all the time.
We might throw open the floor for some, because of conscious of time, any final questions from the audience as well?
Yeah, Ross, there's a question that's come through. What is Assured Support going to provide to subscribers to support the new process or procedures?
So we do a lot of things. So we're rolling out training to our clients at the moment. Obviously, our compliance platform does all those things as well. So it's got all the standards in there. It's got the data glossary and all the bits built in. The difference is that we've put the data glossary on top of the thematic analysis. So it actually makes the complaints and breach reporting better integrated, but also more useful. We also change policy, rewrite policies and help clients do that, train their staff, and we put out a lot of practical stuff. So if you go to our website, assuredsupport.com.au, there are a couple of articles there which are just, here's how you operationalize this stuff. Here's what you need to do, and here are the 5 things you need to focus on now. So again, if you're not a client, you can access that type of stuff. If you're a client or you want to be, we can work with you at whatever level you need to, including doing disputes resolution or assisting you with disputes resolution as well. So there's a whole range of bits and pieces.
Thanks, Sean. So there'll be information available through the website. So there's a common theme starting to come through around, all this extra work involved is reducing the client-facing time that's available to advisors. This is probably the last straw. One comment: I just don't have time left to see clients if a complaint is an expression of concern. So, there's certainly that. Further to what Ross and Sean, you both said, there's a certain level of frustration out there from the audience, and I think, again, what you both have provided with today is certainly going to reduce some of that process-driven stress or anxiety to take some further control of it.
I mean, Cameron, I understand that. I mean, no one went into advice so they become an expert in compliance or managing complaints.
Yeah.
Right. They become advisors because they want to solve problems. They want to help their clients and whatever else. And they're generally very effective on doing that. So this was where I think, to Ross's point, you look for the services that can, or the people that can take that stress away from you, right? And try to balance that, concentrate on what you're good at. And don't try to build strength in an area where you're weak. Concentrate on promoting your strength and get somebody else who's strong in that area to take care of that. And that could be someone in your office or someone external. But that's how, that's the only way we can deal with this level of bureaucracy, I suppose.
I'll just, given time, on the PowerPoint presentation, which I think is going to be loaded on the AFA site, we've given contact details for Sean and myself. We've actually built an online portal as a 24/7 add-on to reinforce complaints management procedures. So if you'd like to come and have a chat with me, quick chat to work out and see if we can help, more than happy to do that. So, and Sean, so your details are there as well. I think I've got a link on yours.
Yeah, that's fine. And if you've got questions, I appreciate we couldn't cover all the questions today. If there's a burning question you've got, send it through to us at Help at Assured Support. We'll try to get back to you and just at least, we might not be able to satisfy you completely with the level of regulation and what's required, but maybe we can answer some of the factual questions or at least point you in the right direction. So if you need assistance, don't feel bad about reaching out to us.
And I think, Cam, you want to talk about the access today?
Yep. So just on behalf of the AFA, thank you, Ross, and thank you, Sean, for the valuable information that you have shared with our members today. For those that submitted questions, we didn't have time, unfortunately, but there was some very good, robust conversation throughout the presentation. We will get to those and come back to you. As both Ross and Sean have said, their information is available through their website. The presentation will be available on the AFA website, and I hope that the information that has been discussed today has provided you some insights, some further insights in how we need to manage complaints moving forward. So on behalf of the AFA and our members, both Ross and Sean, I'd like to personally thank you for the delivery of the webinar today. It's been very insightful and something that I think every person on the call and members that view the webinar on the AFA website would certainly get something out of. And as both, again, Ross and Sean have said, please feel free to reach out so that if you've got any questions. The idea of today was not to simply provide you with all the answers. We know that it's a difficult situation to manage, and the guys are more than helpful in providing assistance moving forward. So on behalf of the AFA, thank you, Sean, thank you, Ross, and to all our members online, have a great day.
Thanks, Cameron.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cam.